Welcome to the show. In today's video titled Refuting the Student Who Schooled Charlie Kirk. This is a debate on abortion, and this is a debate that was held in the Oxford University debate stage, I believe, between the late Charlie Kirk and an Oxford student. So let's get into this. And this video is from the Council of Trent YouTube channel.
Thank you for coming, Charlie. My question to you, I'm a medical student, and so I'm going to throw out the big A word. I know you get asked about it a lot, but I want to hear from you what your opinion is on abortion.
Life begins at conception.
But about abortion specifically. Why do you think abortion is wrong specifically?
Well, you agree murder is wrong?
I agree. Okay, so this is where we get to the question, right? Because what is it about murder you say is wrong? Like, why is murder wrong?
Well, because it's a human being, not just because it has consciousness or because it's of a certain age, because it's a human.
What is it that gives human being this moral worth?
Not its consciousness necessarily.
I didn't say it's consciousness.
I know that. I can imagine it's because it is a human being, because that has a soul.
Normally, I'm a big fan of the Socratic method, but sometimes it's more helpful to just state your case and then dissect the opposing side, especially with someone like Kai, who also likes asking questions. So keep it simple. Abortion is wrong because it's wrong to directly kill innocent human beings, and abortion directly kills human embryos and human fetuses who are innocent human beings. In these situations, you also as a debater have to be careful to not allow a doctor or a medical student to make it seem like that because they claim an expertise in biology, that therefore they are automatically correct about the moral issue being debated. Throughout history, there have been doctors who committed terrible moral acts in the name of medicine. So we need to always remind people that knowledge of medicine and anatomy does not always translate to a moral worldview.
I love that Trent pointed this out. I think this is so true. And I can think of numerous examples of the United States government committing atrocities through medicine, including producing vaccines in countries like India and other countries in Africa that were hurting and harming the people there, and using these people as test subjects and causing terrible amounts of pain to these people, to the point where Bill Gates actually got banned from coming to India ever again, testing vaccines there. And so fully agree with that. Just because people have professional degrees does not mean that they are held at a higher, more superior standard. In fact, or they have a superior role in their moral worldview. And I fully agree with that.
Finally, I would not veer off into talk about souls when debating abortion, because that's a whole other subject to debate. So I'm going to skip over that part of their discussion because it derails the point Charlie needed to make, and start again where they talk about abortion.
And let me ask you, what is the first stage of human development?
So this is the thing, right? We can take it from the sperm being generated in the father and the oocyte being generated in the mother, right? They fuse at birth, conception, sorry. The only thing that happens at conception is these two cells fuse.
Right? No, DNA is created. A zygote.
DNA is not created.
A DNA, no, that's not true. The DNA coding at the zygote. Hold on, time out.
I'll let you finish.
Does a zygote have a unique marker?
Charlie,
does a zygote have a unique marker?
You have to let me speak. You have to
answer it, yes or no. Does a zygote have a unique marker?
Define a unique marker.
Meaning, can you differentiate the DNA coding between the mother and the zygote if you examine it under a deoxyribonucleic acid analysis? Can you?
Only purely because the addition comes from the father.
Oh, so it is something different.
Charlie, DNA is not created. DNA is not created. You have, the father has his own genome, the mother has her own genome. They fuse. This is why you have the same characteristics, similar ones to your mother, similar ones to your father. That's why you have similar characteristics to your siblings. DNA is not created, right? So when you ask me, where does a human being come from? I can say to you, it starts at conception, but all conception is these two cells joining, right?
Wait a minute.
Oh, man. I feel like I know where Trent's going to go with this, but before he states his point, I have to say immediately, this medical student is almost, I don't want to say denigrating, but sort of downplaying the meaning and process of conception. I believe like over 90%, like 96% of biological scientists agree that conception is the beginning of life, of a life form in a human being. That's number one. And number two, he's stating that DNA isn't created, but it's fused between the woman's DNA and the man's DNA during fertilization. It just seems like buzzwords that he's using to deflect and sort of be very circular in his argument.
Rewind and play that again.
So when you ask me, where does a human being come from? I can say to you, it starts at conception. It starts at conception.
The biggest problem with this exchange is that
that's a great point. He even admitted it right there.
Kai and Charlie are talking past each other. An important term to include here would be human organism. What is the first stage of development in the life of a human organism? And even Kai agrees it's conception. I think the reason they're speaking past each other is because Charlie is saying biological human life begins at conception, but Kai is saying human life with unique moral value begins at a later time in human development. That's why Kai seems to be making this kind of bizarre argument that DNA is not created or that conception isn't special. Saying DNA is not created because the genetic material pre-exists in the mother and father's sex cells is like saying houses are not created.
Exactly. I'm so glad Trent pointed this out. I'm so glad.
Because the construction material pre-exists in hardware stores. Now, human beings are not constructed in the womb like a house because they have their whole identity from the moment they are conceived. But my point is that it's silly to think that transformation of materials does not result in new things with value coming into existence. And the point isn't that the human embryo has unique DNA. Every living thing, even single cells, have unique DNA. The point is that the human embryo, after successful conception or fertilization, is a unique human organism, a member of the human species who can, just like you or I, grow and develop, provided they are given nutrition and a proper environment.
That's a really great point that he makes. And one thing I've noticed with abortion debates that many pro-choice argumenters state is that their side states that the human organism isn't valuable at that point in time. So they don't dispute that the human organism exists in the belly of a woman or in the uterus of a woman, but what they argue is that let's hear a thought for a sec. Yeah, so they argue that the life is not, or the human organism, the fetus is not valuable because they don't have sentience or a consciousness to experience, or their life isn't valuable until the first heartbeat at 21 weeks. And this sort of changing the terms because an organism doesn't have consciousness, to me, is not a great argument at all, because in reality, like in many states in the United States and probably a lot of countries around the world, if a pregnant woman is assaulted or murdered, the murderer is charged with double homicide. And that's for a reason. But let's continue here.
Conception is these two cells joining, right? But these two cells were created, the mother cells were created long before, they were created when she was a fetus. So there's none of this DNA being produced, right? So we can't establish, the only thing that happens at conception is these two cells fuse. Now this idea that means that for some reason, suddenly that moral worth comes in, but it wasn't there before when you had these two cells who had half the DNA. But suddenly there's a
correct. Yes, something magical happens at that.
It's not magical, Charlie. We know about this.
Well, hold on.
Charlie.
Time out. Hold on.
Charlie, I promise you, I'm not trying to score points.
Really? Because it seems like that's exactly what you're doing. Clearly what Charlie meant was that something incredibly special happens when the DNA of a sperm and egg combine to form a new, unique genetic sequence in a new human organism, a new human being that never existed before. Charlie's not saying this is something we cannot rationally explain. Kai seems caught up on the idea that because the genetic material that makes up the embryo's DNA existed before the embryo, that means there's nothing special about this material when it fuses together. But that's like saying that since all the paint in a beautiful work of art existed before it was put on a canvas, that means there's nothing more special about a painting than a bottle of paint. However, don't take my analogies about house construction or paintings literally. Human beings are not constructed in the womb like objects. They develop, more like a photograph.
This is a really great point, and obviously that's what people are going to say, like, oh, like it doesn't matter throwing out a piece of wood or throwing out little bottles of paint because you just buy more paint for the production of a great painting. But again, these are objects. These are inanimate, not alive, non-alive objects. But an organism, a fetus, grows in the womb and sustains life, a life form, given that there's nutrition, a good healthy environment for the baby to survive.
You take a Polaroid picture of something rare, like aliens stepping out of a spaceship. The Polaroid picture will just look like a blank brown or black smudge. If someone tore up that picture and said it wasn't a picture of aliens, just a potential picture of aliens, you'd be rightfully mad and say it was a picture of aliens. It just needed time to develop for you and I to see that. And now we will never see that picture. Likewise, an unborn human being is not a potential person. He is a person with great potential who is on a path of development just like you or I. And if you destroy that human being in the womb, then we will never see the earthly life that human being would have possessed.
I'm not trying to score points on you. This is genuine.
We call it the miracle of life for a reason. We've not been able to yet replicate human life development outside of the womb.
We call it the miracle of life because, yes, it's something beautiful, the ability to form a new...
Magical.
It's not... You say magical as in, oh, it's beautiful, it's an incredible thing that happens, of course. But it's not incredible in the sense we don't know what's going on. There's no new DNA coming out of nowhere.
Hold on, but time out. Isn't there a separate DNA, though, than the mother?
Yes, from the father.
Okay, yes, but it's not the father's DNA either. A new coding is created.
Charlie,
you are a blend of the two. And so when did your life begin?
Great question. And Charlie is getting at the right point here. I would just make it specific by saying that prior to conception, there are two organisms, the human mother and the human father. However, after conception, there are three organisms, the mother, the father, and the new very young human being, what we would call a young one, which is what the Greek word embryo or embryon means, or fetus, which is Latin for offspring. I would also at this point in the debate bring up the scientific consensus that the life of a human organism begins at fertilization, at least for the vast majority of human beings.
This is true. This is over 90% of scientists that state this. This is not just a few Christians here and there saying that life begins at conception and because the Bible says so. This is not only based on the Bible. This is based on actual scientific evidence of a majority of consensus with scientists.
Because some humans may come into existence when an embryo splits at twinning, but for everybody else, it's fertilization. The standard medical text, Human Embryology and Teratology states, although human life is a continuous process, fertilization is a critical landmark because under ordinary circumstances, a new genetically distinct human organism is formed. Keith Moore and TVN Prasad's textbook, The Developing Human, states, human development begins at fertilization. And Langman's Medical Embryology also says, development begins with fertilization. In 2019, Steve Jacobs wrote an article called, I asked thousands of biologists when life begins. The answer wasn't popular. He writes, as the usable responses began to come in, I found that 5,337 biologists, or 96% of the survey, affirmed that a human's life begins at fertilization. This was the case even though 85% of the respondents identified as pro-choice. This isn't surprising given that Planned Parenthood's own medical staff once affirmed in a court document that, quote, to describe an embryo or fetus scientifically and factually, one would say that a living embryo or fetus in utero is a developing organism of the species Homo sapiens, which may become a self-sustaining member of the species if no organic or environmental incident interrupts its gestation.
I mean, this is unbelievable. Can you imagine thinking that you're a moral or good person and you understand that this embryo or fetus is growing, is going to grow into a human being. We were all embryos or fetuses at one point. We were all at that stage of life development at that point. And yet people just think, oh yeah, we should still have the choice to murder the baby in the womb. Yeah, it's the woman's choice. We should let it happen, whatever. I mean, it's wild. And I know Ronald Reagan, the former president of the United States, said this. And I thought this was really funny and kind of an eye-opening statement. When he said that, he noticed that all the people that are pro-choice are alive. And I thought that was kind of funny because it's humorous because the case is, if you support something and you wanted that to happen, you wouldn't be here. And I think it's a really good point. And I know it's kind of a very basic thing to say, but just something to consider.
Nathan Nobis, a pro-choice philosopher I've debated, said that the proposition fetuses are human beings or organisms is true. And David Boonin, author of A Defense of Abortion, a philosopher I've also debated, says a human fetus, after all, is simply a human being at a very early stage in his or her development.
When did your life
I mean, again, this comes from what you define as where life starts. You can say life starts at conception, but I'm telling you, I believe that's just an arbitrary point, right? That's just the moment these two cells fuse. Now, you say about this mother thing. So the way DNA is arranged in a cell is it's arranged in chromosomes. Chromosomes are paired up. So you have one from the mother, one from the father, typically, in a healthy individual, right? Now, you can take those maternal chromosomes out and you can find that this is who the person's mother is, and you can do the same with the father. Now, the reason you are different to your mother and father is because some of those chromosomes express genes that are different from each other, and so those genes interact, and that's what gives rise to you, right? But there's no space for any kind of moral framework to come into that until you consider that a human being is capable of consciousness and of suffering. But if you take that out of the equation, the fact that these two DNA, whatever they call molecules, right? These two DNA molecules are fusing, that does not suddenly flip a switch that attributes moral worth to that individual.
This is such a dangerous idea because, wow, where do I even begin with this? Boy. So just because an organism doesn't have consciousness does not mean that they don't have moral standing in society or a moral value in society. Because in that sense, this person or many people would be for abortion at almost any stage prior to birth. And what we know about abortion is that there's two forms of abortion that can occur, maybe more, but the two that I'm aware of that widely happen on the majority of the cases is, I don't know the names of it, but one is the stage where they literally tear off the baby's limbs, limb by limb, and extract the skull, crush the skull. I mean, absolutely graphic, absolutely disgusting. I encourage you all to watch this video. I believe it's from Live Action Organization, so you should all watch that. And then another form of abortion is the pill abortion. So this is on the very early stages where it starves the fetus in the womb. So these are not just two little cells that come together and it's la-di-da and everything's fine. That's not true. This is a very, very harmful action to take. And the fact that he's just minimizing this as the baby doesn't have consciousness is just really, really ridiculous.
I'm just saying, I'm not trying to score points.
Kai's argument seems to be that DNA cannot confer value because the matter that makes up DNA pre-existed the child. However, consciousness seems to come into existence almost from nothing, since consciousness is a non-physical property, and it has a unique moral property associated with it, like pain sensation. So according to Kai, this is what gives human beings moral value, not their biological humanity. However, Charlie Kirk could have said what makes conception morally relevant is that this is the moment a new human organism comes into existence. It's not the DNA itself that gives value, because the skin cells I shed from my body have a complete copy of my DNA, but it's not murder to destroy skin cells. What matters is being a complete human organism, and what makes human organisms more valuable than other organisms or life forms is that they belong to the humankind, which can be seen from their DNA. Now, Kai might ask, why does being human matter at all? To which Charlie could say, because we all agree human rights matter. Don't you believe people ought to have human rights? The problem is that if you try to say human rights is just a shorthand for conscious human rights, then you get all sorts of moral problems, which will come up in this next section.
By what moral standard do you believe that?
I believe that if an individual is capable of suffering, then it's wrong. Now, can I explain my opinion on abortion, just so you can understand? I would agree, as many reasonable people would, that at 9 months, it's unreasonable to expect someone to get an abortion, right? Unless you have some extreme circumstances. But for an elective abortion seems a bit radical to me. But it also seems radical to say that a woman who has just, the cells have just fused, to deny her of an abortion also seems wrong to me. Because that zygote is not capable of suffering, as far as we know.
So by what moral standard? Is that just your opinion? Where did you get that moral standard from?
Because suffering is a...
I love this question. I love this question that Charlie asked. And this is a really great point because I saw this argument between, I don't know if you guys know this, but Dean Withers, he's a more liberal activist type of TikTok debater online. He talked about Trump a lot more, but one of his debates he talked about with abortion is really interesting. And I think he makes this point, which I don't agree with at all, is that when he was debating a Christian on abortion, he was stating that he was using his moral value, or excuse me, his moral preferences as standards of what is good and what is bad, and that is exactly what this gentleman right here in the white t-shirt is doing.
Bad thing. We all know suffering is a bad thing. That's an objective fact, right?
Hold on. So you do believe in objective morality?
I believe that suffering is an objectively negative.
So if you can't feel it, is it okay?
Wow, oh my gosh, I love where Charlie's going with this. He's stating what is moral value, what is the objective moral standard, And is suffering good or bad? Is suffering bad if you can't feel it? This is a great direction he's going with this conversation.
What do you mean if you can't?
Can't feel the pain, is it okay to inflict the pain?
In the sense that if no one's suffering from it, if you have a scenario where nobody is suffering from something, then yes, of course. Something is only a moral question if it affects someone's well-being.
So Kai's argument is basically that you can only harm someone if you harm their well-being, which seems to necessarily involve inflicting pain on a conscious individual. And since human embryos and early fetuses are not conscious, then you cannot harm them, and so abortion is morally permissible. Right off the bat, I would note that this is an overly truncated view of morality. You can harm someone, i.e. make him worse off, without hurting him, causing him to feel pain. For example, one time I was hanging out with friends in high school, and a guy I knew bragged about stealing a gift card on the present table at a rich girl's birthday party. He justified the action by saying she'd never miss it and had plenty of money. And he was right that she wouldn't experience any pain over what he did, but it's still wrong to steal from people just because you think that they have enough or they won't miss what you steal. Another example might be defrauding someone by stealing an inheritance they never knew about, and so they won't feel pain over that, but they have been harmed by being deprived something they have a right to. Just as aborting an unborn child may not hurt the child, but it deprives him of the life he has a right to. And there's many other examples I can present that would show what's wrong with Kai's argument. But first, let's look at how Charlie Kirk responds.
So let me just make sure I understand this correctly. That if it doesn't affect their well-being, so dementia patients that don't know who they are or where they're from, can we execute dementia patients because they're confused about their well-being?
Can you imagine a scenario?
Or Alzheimer's patients.
Charlie,
Alzheimer's patients don't really know much about anything. Can we schedule them for execution because they can't technically suffer?
I'll respond. So can you imagine a scenario where we lived in a society where we killed people when they suffered from dementia, were incapable of suffering, and we killed them, right? Is not a scenario that involves an absence of suffering. There's still suffering involved. Imagine you grow up thinking, my dad could be killed at any moment because he's going to get dementia. Imagine living your life thinking, I could get dementia and suddenly I'd be killed by my state.
Imagine a world where you slaughter 1 million babies every year in America.
Charlie, it's not slaughter. That's the problem.
Kai seems to be presenting a kind of utilitarian argument for the wrongness of killing and giving the standard utilitarian replies. For example, if morality is about maximizing well-being, then it wouldn't be wrong for a hospital to painlessly euthanize a homeless man who has no family in order to use his organs to save 5 sick people. Utilitarians often respond by saying acts like this are wrong, not because it's just wrong to kill innocent human beings, but because these kinds of acts cause more suffering overall. In this case, a utilitarian might say it's wrong because this kind of policy makes the rest of us afraid to go to the hospital because we might get chopped up for our organs. Now, you could point out that the utilitarian response really doesn't capture the horror of justifying the direct killing of innocent people for the good of other people, but you can also just pick different thought experiments to make the same point and avoid the reply, especially if you're in a debate scenario like Charlie's in, where there's a time crunch element. This is why in my debate with Destiny on abortion, I brought up the example of genetically modifying unborn children and turning them into brainless human beings to use as organ farms or even as objects to be violated by child predators. Unlike the Alzheimer's case, none of us would ever be in fear that we would be turned into a brainless object since we've already gone through gestation. So Kai couldn't appeal to that kind of rationale to condemn this act. The only justification that makes sense is that it is wrong to deprive human beings of their natural course of development, whether by making them brainless through in utero modification or making them dead through in utero dismemberment. Finally, consciousness is a species-neutral category. If by consciousness you mean just being able to feel pain, well, non-human animals like rats or pigeons can feel pain and even perform mental tasks like solving mazes or delivering the mail, but they aren't persons. So Kai's argument will fail if it grounds morality in this level of consciousness, because I doubt he's going to bite the bullet and say fumigating rats is mass murder because they can feel pain.
Okay, I'll end that there. He's going on for a while. So I think Charlie did a really great job with debating him on these issues. I think I'll say a number of things that I think is really a downward spiral with the pro-choice argument. So one statement that a couple well-read liberals, and I give them credit, they're very well-read, they're very knowledgeable on the topic, in fact, sometimes more knowledgeable than conservatives when it comes to pro-life and abolitionists. So when it comes to their argument of sentience, they state that a consciousness and sentience is of a higher moral standard, or should be more important, and should have a higher obligation for the state to intervene in than something like a fetus, an organism like a fetus. And their argument falls apart because organisms such as, or if you only talk about sentience and all that, well, animals have sentience, but if you have to choose between saving one baby that has consciousness and then 10 pigs that have sentience, then who are you going to save? You're going to save the 10 pigs, typically. Or if 10 pigs have sentience, but one baby is born but doesn't understand the world, it's really kind of unconscious. There's a kind of a problem with the birth and everything like that. Well, who are you going to save, the baby or the 10 pigs that have full consciousness? And this is where their argument falls apart, because when you only talk about objective morality in the sense of only consciousness and sentience, this is where the problem comes into play, and not valuing life in all forms, especially because the fetus is a living organism in the early stages of development for a human being. This is a objective reality, and this is not just coming from the Bible, even though the Bible affirms this, when the Gospels state in the Old Testament that our Lord knew us before we were formed in the womb. He knew us, and this is absolutely true. So again, please like, share, subscribe to the channel, comment your thoughts below. I would love to hear what you guys have to say, and again, any videos that you'd like me to react to, please let me know. Thank you all.